Committee, 1st of June 2023. You all have an agenda pack with you today which sets out terms of reference for the committee, the Scrutiny Committee, and it also acknowledges our membership. So what I'd like to do first of all is to welcome our 3 new members. So we have Catherine Seymour, who joins us from Berwick.
Really?
We have Mary Murphy. Mary, which is your ward? Just so we...
Choppington.
Choppington. Almost as lovely as Cramlington.
Oh, it's better.
And we've also got Holly Waddell, who joins us, and you're from over in Wild West, aren't you?
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your time on the Scrutiny Committee. It's a very varied committee, and as you're probably aware, we have external members as well. You're sitting next to Reverend Lennox there. We normally have more, but I think we have some apologies for this morning. But just a reminder that the terms of reference are there. What we cover is there. There will be some changes which will be reported at a future meeting about some of the terminology which needs to be adjusted for our terms of reference, but we'll bring that to a future Scrutiny Committee. So if we can now just take... Do you need to thank the people that left? I would like to publicly thank Councillor Dale, who was a very vociferous member of this committee, and all the others who've participated as well. And Christine Dunbar, who I just realised is no longer with us. So, I'm not in the sense of not being on the committee.
Thank you too, because I'm still here going strong.
You are
Richard,
absolutely very much going strong. So, if we can now move on to apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, I've received them from Councillors Fennis, Aiken, Watson, Councillor Glenn Thompson, Mr Hodgson, Mr Rickard and Lynn Houghton.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 4th of May in the Council Chamber. There are pages 1 to 4, and it is just to note any items of accuracy. So page 1, page 2, page 3. I'm not seeing any indication anyone wants to amend those, so I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Item number 4 is the disclosure of members' interests. Everyone has signed a disclosure of members' interest form with the County Council. All I'm interested in is if there is anything on today's agenda which is over and above any public declaration which you may have made. I'm not seeing any indication of that, so that is noted. We now come on to item number 5, which is the forward plan of key decisions, pages 5 to 10 in your agenda pack. And Chris Angus, you're going to take us through that.
There's just one item on the forward plan that's relevant to facts, and that is the outcomes of the formal consultation for Berwick. That'll come to facts on the 18th of July. The rest of the forward plan is just a message.
Thank you very much, Chris. We now move on to the substantive part of this morning's scrutiny meeting, which is the annual report of the Children's Principal Social Worker. Graham, I'm going to ask you to introduce this, and obviously to introduce yourself to new members, and then we'll be taking the substantive report from Sue later on, and then Sue, you can introduce yourself to members. So please take the report. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Graham Wright. I'm our Director for Children's Social Care, Young People and Families, and so overall responsibility for social care. And what we're presenting this morning is the annual Principal Social Workers Report, which Sue will introduce herself. But the role of Principal Social Worker is to provide support for the professional development of social workers, but also to ensure that we are meeting our statutory requirements in terms of support for and the delivery of social work. Now, I know the committee here are well cited on some of the national and local challenges there are around recruitment and retention of social workers. And what Sue's report is giving us a lot of detail of what we're trying to do to address and support retention and the work of our social work workforce. So I will pass you over to Sue.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for reading the report. I'm Sue Cole, Principal Social Worker. So, as noted within the report, the key issues are recruitment and retention of children's social workers, manageable caseloads, practice improvement, and the impact post-pandemic on practice and service delivery. Residual issues of COVID is bringing challenges for families and service delivery, such as the significant growth in mental health issues and the cost of living crisis. It's resulted in additional referrals to Northumberland Children's Services, and in turn, that puts a lot more pressure on social worker capacity. With that said, the Department for Education has commissioned a timely independent review of children's social care recently, and I continue to support Northumberland and as the regional chair of the PSW network by partaking in regular consultation events to support the voice of the social workers on a national platform. As outlined in the report, our turnover rate is lower than the national average and our vacancy rate has reduced. It's markedly lower than the national average and lower than the regional average, thankfully, as the national picture is telling us that there are now 900 less social workers than there were a year ago, and this is concerning and again impacts social worker caseloads. Our workload weighting system attempts to kind of make sure that we consider what's required in terms of the demographic, the travel element of it, and what that looks like. So we try and make sure that we don't just count a child as a number, but look at the caseload as a whole. What we're trying to do in terms of addressing these issues is we're continuing to grow our own children's social work staff. Our Children's Academy is receiving 18 new starters this September, actually. An external review of our academy noted it is going from strength to strength, which is really pleasing to hear. We're always keen to improve practice and in turn, make sure that outcomes for our children and families are the priority for positive outcomes. What the reviewers also noted was that equality, diversity and inclusion are a strength in Northumberland ASY programme, despite actually a limited diverse population. Incidentally, I'm the co-chair of the Race Equality Network here in Northumberland Children's County Council, actually, not just Children's. I'm proud to say that Audrey Kingham, Executive Director of Children, Young People and Education, and Graham are our executive sponsors, and they do a lot to support us to make sure that the opportunities are made available for inclusion for all. But back to the new starters, to support pressure points, what we do is we encourage those successful who are going to be joining the Academy in September to come in as non-social work support staff. It also encourages them to be able to network, it encourages them understanding the culture and learning about the requirements and the high expectations from us as a leadership team in terms of outcomes for children. But we want a happy workforce, that's very important to us, and so we make efforts to make sure that that's supported as well. I'm pleased to say actually that 5 of those aforementioned 18 come from effective succession planning through the BA Social Work Apprenticeship route. We piloted that a few years ago. We were one of the first in the region to do it. The 5 are all internal members of staff who previously worked in non-social work roles, but who had excellent transferable skills. Obviously, it was an intensive recruitment process to make sure that we get the calibre of staff that we want to support our families. It's a 3-year degree with being an undergrad, and study fees are paid via the apprenticeship levy. And the other thing that I'm really pleased about is that we've just recruited 5 new students starting in September, so we're really conscious of making sure we have that kind of flow coming through. I'm also supporting the development of an MA route, actually, to speed up the process for those who already hold an undergrad degree. In line with effective forward-focused planning, we attended universities, colleges to discuss careers in social care. Post-COVID has resulted in an employee market. As we know, there's staffing issues everywhere, whether it's retail, hospitality. So we're making sure that, we're trying to get in as early as possible to make sure that we support influence early career choices. We're particularly interested in bringing more males into the profession. It's very important for our children and families to have positive male role models around us. With regards to our social worker recruitment initiatives, we use targeted social media. We also use fast-track routes to bring social workers in. We are currently recruiting actually by the Step Up the Social Work programme, a supporting programme, and the next cohort will commence placements in January 2024. And it's every 2 years that programme goes on. Going back to the turnover rate, to understand our local position, what I do is I hold exit meetings with our staff who are leaving. Of note, those members of staff who have left are predominantly from locality safeguarding teams. And, you know, these teams support children who have or may have suffered significant harm. And the emotional impact of working in this service area can really affect resilience at times. However, what exit meetings does tell me is that the general premise is that management is very supportive, and that's very good to hear. As I've stated, the ones who I've interviewed or had a meeting with, they've all gone to different service areas and not into the locality safeguarding teams in different local authorities or out of social work altogether, which is, it's sad, but it's also, you know, the reality of what vicarious trauma can do from this service area. When discussing absence rates, the highest percentage of absence is due to anxiety and stress. The ongoing impact post-COVID, coupled with national headlines around the very sad outcomes for children like Arthur and Star, it's impacted social worker and social care staff morale. With that said, our leadership pledge offers high support and constructive challenge to ensure children are the priority for us here in Northumberland. We make every attempt to empower our staff as well. It's important that we support the ones who are out there doing the kind of direct work with families. We're conscious as a leadership team, and we're also conscious of making sure that the support's there and there's a breadth of wellbeing services available corporately and with effective line management supervision. What we're also pleased to hear from the views of children's social care staff who partook in the corporate staff survey was, you know, that 76% feel I often always look forward to going to work, 96.53 I feel my role makes a difference to residents and service users and customers, and 81% communication between senior management, head of service level and staff is effective. And that's very important to us to make sure that the staff feel heard and seen. Effective communication occurs via lots of different routes, but one of them is via regular practice days, for example, to have a real hand on the pulse of service delivery. I note from the report you will have seen the priorities for 2023, and we greatly appreciate your support in assisting us to meet those. They are listed. I don't know if you would like me to go through them or whether you would like to have a look at them yourself, but they're very much around making sure that we, you know, I'm on a workforce steering group. It's very important to make sure we're at succession planning. We do a lot to try and improve our social workers' development, a lot of CPD opportunities, and we want to make sure that we have the best staff, to be fair, making sure that the best outcomes are supported and the impact on families and children is huge. Children will always be the priority, and we continue to hopefully do that to positive effect.
Great. So I'm sure some of those questions may come out from questions from members. Do I have any questions from members? That was a very good report, by the way, so thank you for that. So any questions? So I'm seeing Mark, I'm seeing Mary, sorry, get the names right, and I'm seeing Catherine Paul. Sorry, Caroline Paul. So Catherine Seymour. So Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Sue. I've seen a number of these reports now over the years, and we know this is a very difficult field of work. We know can be very rewarding, and the work that these people do with the public is very challenging, and can be very difficult. And what we need to understand as well is, and I've said this many times, it's the focus on what we do with the public, but we also need to consider, as you said, looking after our own staff. And that's a real big thing that we need to consider on these. So there's a couple of things, and as I say, looking at these over the past years, it's worrying to hear about a 900 reduction across the country. But welcome to see that Northumberland sort of bucking the trend on this national thing. But I'm wondering, like, do you know if the national figure is due to extra pressures as a result of like COVID pressures and impacts? If it's down to that. And also the welcome improved results in Northumberland. Is this down to the academy, or is that only part of the approach that's making this improvement in Northumberland?
I think it's a multitude of things. We were very grateful that the Academy was supported fully from the beginning. It was a proactive approach as opposed to being reactive, and what we see, you know, I do a lot of work nationally, and what we see in other local authorities is it's not always that effective support from the top to make sure that the resource is there so that the effective work can be done to support families. I think the 900, it's definitely impact of COVID. You know, we see it in every sector, don't we, now, where there's staffing issues, and we're no different to that. And also, I think the vicarious trauma of the social care staff being out there, making sure hidden harm was addressed during COVID. I don't think there's enough credit given to that. I absolutely admire health staff and all that they do, but when we think about schools remained open, the teachers supported us so that the vulnerable children could be in school and we could have eyes on them. So I think it's coupled with a lot of different things that are impacting this service area. We've always, unfortunately, in children's had issues to retain staff. We can recruit, we find. Numbers are lower even actually when we're looking at recruitment figures. For example, Step Up to Social Work, 2 years prior, there were 265 applications over the region, and this year we've got 160 applications for 58 places, which is quite concerning, given that we want the best. So we want a pool that we can kind of, you know, recruit effectively from and make sure that the calibre is high. It's a worry.
Yeah, I think there's a whole range of reasons kind of why we're perhaps booking some of the trends, but I don't want to say that we've wholly cracked it at all, because there are significant workload pressures on our social work staff, but it is about the support and development opportunities. But I think it's also, as Sue mentioned, about the culture that we've got to be in this together. So rather than the leadership team being pointing and saying, you've got to sort this, this is a shared issue for which we are all responsible, about the quality of the work and the support for staff to deliver on the front line. And I think the other bit that was pleasing for us, that Sue's mentioned in the report and we've said here before, is when we have added external inspections, for example through Ofsted, when we came on the focus visit last July, commenting on how positive social workers were about the support and development opportunities they had.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just going to go along the line because that makes it easier for me. So, Catherine.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for that report. And actually, Mark asked the question about the 900 less. So that's the other question I had really was about the. You mentioned recruiting. You like to recruit more males, and I'm just wondering what the percentage is now, males versus females, as well as how are you planning to do that? You know, because obviously you want the best person for the job, so they would obviously. Yeah, I just wondered how you're going to work around that. And the other thing is, oh yes, on the absence reasons, you have the anxiety, stress, depression, other psychiatric illnesses at 755.59. And then other reasons, or is the other reasons, or the other, no, I don't think that would make up to 625, 63. So what are the other reasons?
I don't actually know. When they don't fall into one of these categories, I've been informed that it's dropped into other reasons. Unfortunately, I don't know what they would be, because the list is quite extensive in terms of. Do you have any?
These would be the standard corporate ways of defining absence and illness.
Right.
So we wouldn't have any additional information on that.
Yeah.
That's the thing we would say, again, we're very rigorous and robust when our staff are off in terms of the support and the work and the reviews that we do with them. So individually we'll be fully aware of what the challenges and issues are for them, and trying to support them to deal with whatever it might be.
I think it'd be fair as well to say that when someone has been off, they get a return to work interview as well,
Absolutely.
which would pick up some of that. But this is the corporate reporting mechanism that we use as a council.
Yeah.
So I think the others could be a myriad of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
But in terms of the males,
Yes.
actually we're starting to go into schools now, because I feel that we missed the trick when we go to the careers level when they're kind of in those higher year 10, etc. So what we're really interested in is getting in earlier, going into schools perhaps at level 7, you know, in year 7, so that we can kind of encourage, because otherwise then it becomes that's a female sector by some of the young men, and we want them to really think of it as actually it's a humanist sector where everybody wants to support the most vulnerable. So that's what we'd like to do.
And then Audrey wants to come in as well.
So just to say, I think absolutely getting into school so much earlier, and we're trying to do that so much more with a whole range of topics. We've got some amazing case studies and individuals that work in social care that we should really showcase in terms of the value of the work that they do, their expertise, their length of service. Ideally, if we can find one of our team who've gone to that school, they become, if you like, a role model within the school. If we can link that back and get them into governance and support with governance in schools, there are multiple ways to do this. And I think it's a really good question asked, particularly around the gender balance. We've got to take away some of the kind of barriers, if you like, to have a really open career way and pathway for everybody, and to really see that the value. We've had some colleagues who've gone up to national awards. So there, again, the showcase opportunities that really should start to help us with that recruitment. But you're right, Councillor Swinburne, it's a real challenge. And I don't see it becoming less of a challenge over time. COVID has been a real definer, and we've talked about this, and in fact Graham for a number of years has talked about workforce being a real challenge, and I've started to say actually that's now coming to light in education. So the challenges that the team have seen in social work, we are now starting to see in education, and people are making choices. You know, whilst we've got amazing staff, we've got some amazing opportunities, it is a really tough job. It's brilliant rewarding, but let's be honest, it's tough, and to come through COVID and do the legacy work post-COVID, it's almost tougher now post-COVID and dealing with some of the things that we've not dealt with previously, and that's both in social care and in education. So we need to think more dynamically around how we're going to showcase this as a career route. But there are some existing brilliant, and I'm sure some new brilliant thoughts and ideas to come in the future.
Did you want to add anything, Graham?
It probably is that this also needs a national push, and Sue referenced the independent review of children's social care and the response to that. From the North East, we do work very collectively well regionally, and we've made a number of suggestions, and one of the things needs to be a very positive national push about social work and the positive nature of that work, including, as part of that, we'll need to be looking at the gender makeup of the workforce as well as diversity. So I think there's a number of things that need to be supported nationally for us, but we'll be clear about the range of things we're trying to do.
And I think that role modelling is very important. So when we go to universities, we take an alumni from the uni with us to make sure that people see people like themselves and realise that they can kind of progress. And some of our academy are now team managers, advanced practitioners, so we're very proud around the development of the staff.
So I think just to pick up on your point about recruitment and men and things, be helpful in the annual report for next year to maybe document some of that quite radical forward planning that you've got, because some of the year 7s won't obviously appear as social workers next year, but that's about investing for the future. So it'd be good to get a flavour of how we've actually done that outreach and engaged for next year, because this is going to be a long-term planning, but I think it's a valid point to make.
It was picked up regionally by regional colleagues about the gender makeup across, I think it was something like 87%. 87% female.
87?
It was across the region. Was the makeup that's been picked up by.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, Mary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I've got a combination of questions and comments. My very first PACS meeting, and it's my favourite subject, social work. So for full disclosure, I am a social worker, and from time to I don't work in Northumberland, I'm allowed to participate in this. From time to time, I do agency work, and I've also done independent work. So I feel like there's a few areas that interest me in here. So the first thing I want to ask about is the practice improvement. So obviously Northumberland adopts the signs of safety model, as do many other local authorities. And when it first came in, there was a lot of things that were said to the workforce, which were about, this is what we hope to achieve with signs of safety. And one of those things was reducing the amount of children, on child protection plans, and reducing the amount of children looked after and so on. And obviously, as the years go on, these kinds of models become embedded, and I've recently worked in a local authority where they changed all their IT systems and all of their looked after children paperwork to fit the signs of safety model. But I guess my question is the effectiveness of the model still being evaluated to see, because it's a huge amount of bureaucratic change, and there are some brilliant things within signs of safety, but every time you recruit somebody new, and they don't really understand it all, it's just their day-to-day way that they work. So I'm really interested as to what continuing evaluation there is and how that's measured against the objectives that when we first adopted this model, this is what we wanted to achieve with it. Do you want them to answer each point
So
at a
what would
time?
be helpful, I think if we could ask them some quite granular detail there, it'd be helpful to take them one at a time. Would it be helpful as well just to talk us through a little bit about what signs of safety is for anybody who's watching this and doesn't understand?
Yes.
Just a brief, very brief summary, please.
Yeah, and it's still putting out. Signs of safety is a particular practice approach. It's a way of working that's been developed internationally, actually, through Andrew Tinnell, who was basically Australian, actually, and was over here very recently to help us launch some work, which I'll talk separately about in relation to that. And it is a way of making sure that you engage effectively with children and young people directly, the parents on the network, particularly the network, to make sure that they are supported. There's particular methodologies in terms of how you might ask questions, how you might structure your information. But the point I would make is that evaluating the impact is about looking at what the impact of whatever the practice is around that. So we have looked at what we've done with signs of safety, but actually we've got a whole quality practice framework, which I think is viewed very positively both by Ofsted and nationally in terms of the range of methods we use to understand how effective our work is, and also where areas that we continue to need improvement on. And Sue mentioned practice days. So for example, that is practice days where I and 3 or 4 senior managers will go to a service area and look at the work with the staff, alongside the staff, looking at the work on the system, getting feedback from families in a range of ways, as one of the methods that we use, as well as auditing and other things. And I think that does give us a good view of the quality of practice, almost regardless of the actual framework that we use, because that's the important thing for us. There are some real positives around that, and I also know some real challenges as well in some of the processes of signs of safety, which we have to continue to work through. But I think over the time I've been here now, which is 5 years, we've really invested in making sure that is a way of supporting our social work staff to work consistently across the county with families and children, that it isn't different, varied. And one of the challenges we have is that was happening, and actually bringing this more consistent approach, I think has been helpful and helped us to drive practice improvements. In terms of evidence for that, we would see that in our quality of practice work, but I suppose one of the key areas is the Ofsted judgments and Ofsted views. We certainly saw the improvement in 2020 and from a recent focus visit in July last year in terms of our continuing effectiveness, and areas where we still need to develop because we never crack it.
And the key word within signs of safety is working with the family. They are experts in their own lives. Yes, we're child-centred and we will always prioritise the child, but we have to think about when we're no longer involved with the family, starting with the end in mind around how they're going to be able to support each other and that for the community around them. Thanks.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you about recruitment and retention. So I'm really thrilled to see the exit interviews in here. When I first started as a counsellor in Northumberland, I asked at one of our corporate services for, are you talking to social workers when they leave? Are you talking to team managers? Are you asking them, what could we have done for you to stay? Which is, those barriers and those obstacles. Now, post-COVID, I've seen so many people leave the profession because there's just saying life is too short. We have a limited amount of time on this planet and I need to do other things with my life. And what that leads me to is the bit about what isn't within the recruitment policies. So I don't know if you remember when Sunderland went into special measures and the government, encouraged them to set up Together for Children. When Together for Children started, every single advert that they put out had a list of all the different ways you could work flexibly for that organisation. You could have reduced hours, you could have condensed hours, you could have term time working, you could have flexible working, you could have hybrid working, and that has disappeared from the social work recruitment landscape. The most you'll see now is flexible hours. There's not even job shares advertised anymore. When I first qualified, every post was advertised for job share. Everybody I know who has left social work has left for quality of life reasons. And unless we give people options to stay, which is, yes, you can work 2.5 days if you want, but also to enable those people who do that to still progress, because there is no opportunity to progress unless you're prepared to work full time. People like me who have caring responsibilities, younger people who just want a life, the young social workers will tell you, I want to be able to go out with my friends and forget about things the way that they do, but I'm always thinking about work. I think we need to look carefully at what Sunderland did, how effective they were. They're now an outstanding company and they have turned themselves around, and partly that's about the ability they've had to recruit. And they're less flexible now because they don't need to be as flexible because they can attract people. But I just think we need to look root and branch of what we can offer people. And I know it's more bureaucratic for an organisation to have more staff working in more complex ways, but that's what, we all get paid the big bucks for, isn't it? So that we can manage those models and, come up with those ways. So I guess that's a comment, as well as, holding it open for your views on that degree of flexibility, because I know it would make a difference for people like me and lots of my colleagues in terms of whether they would remain working for local authorities.
We certainly do look at doing that in a range of ways for that, but you're right in terms of the balance that we have to do to make sure we deliver a service all the days and times that we need to deliver that. There is a real challenge in managing that tension around those. I think equally, for example, flexible working, one of the challenges has been hybrid working, and I think for me there is some merit in that, but that has to be limited because of the relational nature of the work, and certainly what we found in COVID from what our staff were saying to us very clearly is whilst it did work to a degree, actually what they missed is that immediate informal support links with colleagues. So actually, with agreements, we brought some back in earlier to make sure they had that level of support, because the nature of the work, and if you are working more hybrid or home-based, actually has some serious risks, I think, in terms of the support for and the well-being of the staff as well. So I think those are the things we balance, and we certainly do look at them and use them where we can. But as you say, there are tensions about how we can do that.
We're very grateful to Graham for permitting the academy to actually come in and as a cohort and the office space, because the learning by osmosis is invaluable. And as you know, social work is very much about that relational and that foundation building to then be able to kind of manage the challenges as well as the strengths around that. So it's a real, isn't it, in terms of how that's done. Meet everybody's needs.
I think the answer is it's work in progress, but we're constantly on the radar. Yeah.
One last point, Chair, is that
Absolutely.
okay? Just the bit about agency social workers. Again, that's something that I do from time to time, and that is about flexibility and it is about caring responsibilities. But the thing that has always galled me is how much money local authorities waste on private agency recruiters, when all they are is a dating agency. All they do is introduce me to the end client through a bureaucratic process. And I've advocated for years for the regional local authorities to come together and do their own. If the political will is there to have an in-house across the region social work agency that cuts out every hour that I work for an end client, an agency takes a cut of your money, and that's outrageous. It's an absolute waste of local authority money, and I just think, is this something we can start to think about?
I lead on regional work and responses to agency work in children's social work, and particularly management of the memorandum of understanding. I'm just answering your point about doing that regionally. I know there's one other region that tried to start to do that, and that's a very long game.
Yeah.
It's a very complex answer, and that's the Northwest, and they haven't got anywhere near it and have been trying to develop that for a long time. So I think, whilst I think in principle that sounds okay, I don't think it's a short-term immediate answer. It's something we have looked at and have considered, but actually that's a long way off. I think there's a number of issues with agency work at the minute. There is a real challenge for us in terms of trying to maintain agreed pay rates across the region because of the scarcity, and there's a whole further debate about the lack of sufficiency on there. And I've got to say that this needs national direction in terms of agreed pay rates nationally, in terms of agreed experience that agency social workers have, use of project teams, which is a particular issue in our area. So I think it's a whole separate debate about how that is managed more effectively, but it does need national direction in terms of how that works more effectively to support consistent supply of work.
And part of this is the care reviews are focusing heavily on the agency element, you know, to make sure that that's not to have.
Yeah.
Follow-up question.
And thanks for this, brilliant.
Caroline.
Thank you. So I want to go back, not a social worker, but obviously the stuff with recruitment, retention. My thing is the recruitment side of things. The social work academy, I absolutely love it. I don't think it's like enough people know about it outside of Northumberland County Council, and I think that marketing of what that is. But the academy makes you think starting point of learning, which you actually need a BA to be in there, really, don't you? So for me, that's a bit of a barrier as well, because and I've mentioned it before, we need to be able to get the pool bigger of 16 to 18-year-olds that want to go in to social work, because it's that choice when you do your exams, where you go after you finish school. So it's actually making people want to be social workers and how we do that. And I think there's a number of barriers to be a social worker. If you have to have a BA to even get in the social work academy, at 16-year-old when I was sat at Ashton High School, where was it the choice to go, right then, if you do this, this and this, but actually when you turn around and look on paper, the wages, the responsibility and the stress attached to being a social worker, or I can go a lot easier route to get the same wage. It's being able to get people through that system, and I think obviously there is apprenticeships and things like that, but actually what are we doing in Northumberland to make people want to be a social worker, go and get that BA, the non-academic routes as well, because obviously you can do a degree in the workplace as well. So I just think not just about them people out leaving university with the BA already, but how we get them at 16 to want to be a social worker, to go onto the course, and maybe some of the supported stuff, because the cost of living crisis is having an impact on things like going to university. Because if you know for a fact you're going to have 100 grand's worth of debt when you leave, is it worth it? So being able to, and a number of industries are supporting people through the degree now. So I just think some of them other options we need to try and explore from the age of 16. It's great. I think the social work academy is brilliant, but I almost think we need a social work school. So to be able to move them right the way through. When it comes down to the bringing people in and underrepresented, we need it. I think the marketing of social work, it's, you know, when you just, because social work, it always gets a reputation of being really hard, the grim stuff, the horrific stuff, the blame game of where the buck stops. But actually, on the other side of things, without safeguarding, without social workers, a lot of things don't happen in this country. So, and again, when you look at things like football, rugby, cricket, like without your designated safeguarding officer, none of them happen. Your World Cup won't happen, you know what I mean? Because you need that safeguarding and make sure that people are looked after as well. So I think some of the marketing of the good stuff and how rewarding the career actually is. And I think we really need to look at some of that in-work training, the messaging that goes out about social work, because the social work academy is absolutely brilliant. But I speak to a number of people that haven't got a clue what the social work academy is in Northumberland. And it's like, well, why don't a lot of the partner agencies that we work with young people know about this, to be able to help and support them young people to want to be a social worker and do all the brilliant stuff that you do. Obviously, fully support about the agency stuff. I've mentioned it so many times and think that we should set up our own agency. And even if it was a trial where we turn around and go, right, then we're recruiting agency staff for a bit more money, but it still works out less than what we would normally pay the agency fees. Give it a try as well and do some trials on it, because I think sometimes things take a lot longer to get going, and by the time we've actually solved the problem, it's 10 years too late. So I think instead of being that reactive, getting up front of some of these problems. But apart from that, yeah, you're doing bloody brilliant. And it's great to see the information about the staff and how happy they are. But obviously the only thing about the not enough staff in my department, which is obviously an ongoing issue. And if we can, if anybody from government is listening, send some more money this way, please.
Right. How do we market this?
Well, I've been involved with the Spring Pod actually, and so I wanted to see the whites of the young people's eyes, because I just love being around young people. I think they're our future, they're everything, aren't they? But it was on screen, and the questions were just sent to me, and then they were kind of on the other side. They couldn't see them, so we're really keen. We're actually going into one of the schools very soon. It's planned, so to really have that rich conversation with the children. And also in children's social work, unfortunately, there's a fear for a lot of our residents around, you know, what that is. And so that puts a barrier in place, and we really want to break that.
I think that's what I think this needs national push in terms of, you know, very positive framing of what social work is as a career option for people. But we do also, as well as that route, as Sue says, and some evidence in the report, you know, across our social care workforce and our social work workforce, we try and recruit them, the people who obviously are very good at social care work, and where there are opportunities, they can then bring them in through apprenticeships or other routes into that work. So I think it's a broader picture as well. But
I just think that 16 to 18 is so important, because if you don't get them interested then, you're never going to get them. So if you get a pool of 1,000 people between 16 and 18 that then want to go on and do the BA, then you've got a bigger pool that have got the BA, where at the moment you've got less people here, then less people there, and then even less people at the end. So I just think if we can get them 16-year-olds wanting to be social workers, and like...
Before I bring Holly in, can I just pull an extension from the question there? Do you need a degree? Do you have to have a degree to be a social worker? Okay. What about those people who have perhaps got lots of life skills? 16 to 18 years, we're talking about people second, third career, maybe in their 40s or 50s, who want and think, I've got life skills, I've got social skills, I've got networking skills, and I want to bring that to be able to benefit my community. How would someone like that become a social worker?
We've got a lot of those actually in our non-social work roles currently. The richness that they bring, please be very conscious that social workers don't do it ourselves. We've got a lot of kind of valuable support around us, and we don't like the hierarchy element actually, because the non-social work staff around us, the social work support assistants, the admin, you know, the networking of the multi-agency, the schools, the pastoral support, we're all part of a supporting children together and safeguarding children collectively. It's not just a one-man show, and we're very much around making sure that that is acknowledged, and that's why the network and the science of safety, particularly the networking element of supporting families collectively, is very important to us.
So there is a route in.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
you don't have a degree, and theoretically, if somebody is in their 40s or 50s who comes in that route, which is the kind of, you know, the peripheral support, could they progress through an in-house degree or the apprenticeship route
Yes,
to become
absolutely.
right? Okay.
At the national review in terms of looking at the concept of family help, and I think that's right as well.
Yeah.
I shouldn't dilute the social work role particularly, but I think that the potential to acknowledge and develop the wider support that's available, not social work qualified, but the skills and life experiences.
Because the reality is, say you are an admin assistant here and you want to retrain as a social worker,
Absolutely.
that's great. But if I had to leave to go to university, who's going to pay my mortgage?
Yeah.
You know, able to do that while in work to then go into the thing that you want to go into. But
And that's where the apprenticeship
Yeah.
is so valuable. You spoke about salary structures before. One conversation that has been ongoing with the PSW network, and I'm sure with our directors. At the moment, the DFE are reluctant to do a standard rate across the England. The view around that is we need to be realistic around looking at what the pressure points are. I've spoke to you about how it's the locality safeguarding teams where we lose staff a lot more than anywhere else. So there shouldn't be a standard because we don't struggle to bring people into our fostering services or even into our children with disability services. Well, we do, but not as much as the locality teams. So there needs to be some recognition about where the pressure points are greater than others. Unfortunately, there's staffing issues everywhere now. And you're speaking about the younger people coming in. We used to get a very good feed through residential support workers. But now it seems that there's a lot of people don't want to do night shifts and, shift work. So it's kind of forced a different spin to challenges to recruiting. But we keep trying.
Can I bring Holly in and then Councillor Dodd wants to?
Thank you, yeah. It's quite an interesting conversation to sit down. Personally, I've just finished my Masters of Social Work and started the SYE post. So yeah, it's quite interesting to hear it from a recruitment perspective because I've just gone through the recruitment at a different local authority, of course. I think it's important to kind of be aware of the national context of this. Like nursing bursaries, there's outrage about nursing bursaries being cut. I've had to pay out of pocket to qualify as a social worker. Social work bursaries haven't been increased in years, and it's the case that it's not covering the fees for us to qualify. So we are having to self-fund that. So it's not really a surprise that there's not people coming through that programme to qualify. Later in life once you've already done your first degree. So yeah, the national kind of review of that is, I think, vital. Yeah, because I was on a cohort of 16, so there's only 16 newly qualified social workers come out of that. So to kind of pick those out and get them to Northumberland is going to be quite difficult, I feel. So yeah, it's very I think all the points that have been made are kind of quite important and kind of feed into that.
Councillor Dodd.
Yeah, Reverend Lennox will know, we go back for a long time on this committee. And this is like the weed that grows in your garden every year. No matter what you do, it's potentially always there. You cannot, it was like this 15, 20 years ago. There has been tweaks, it has improved. But I remember, we paid 32,000 per social worker. I'm going back a long time. And then the agency cost us 52. So we don't want to go down the agency path, but it's sometimes the only option. And if we don't have a little bit of agency work, that agency work that we dip into now and again will not be there. So we have to keep a little bit of agency work in our pocket to make sure that there is somebody when we get short-staffed or other people are off. But this problem has always been here. And I would love to reinvent a new wheel to go on the wagon, but I don't think we will.
Right, okay.
And I've got to go to work.
I know, so Richard has to leave us. So we've been asked, I'm not seeing any other questions, so what we've been asked to do with this report is to acknowledge the content and the work that's been done in the last year, because it is the annual report, but also to look at and identify other areas of scrutiny and challenge. And I think we've had quite a robust discussion this morning. And it's really interesting having two professionals sitting here on this. It's
Stop people from going to be councillors, that's what you need.
And that's one of the good things, because it actually does provide quite robust challenge to you about what you're doing, but also it's about the life skills which people in this committee bring here as well. So I'd like to thank you for bringing us the report. I look forward to next year's, particularly around what we're doing around that quite radical ways of engaging people with joining to be a social worker. And I think one of the points which Caroline did raise is around profile. And I know that there's some national initiatives coming up, but I think even, I started, and there's nothing wrong with being an admin, but I started as an admin, now I'm a social worker, that kind of trajectory, and also around how we can make this a more welcoming career for men particularly, because as you say, the perception is that it's predominantly, and in percentage terms, it is predominantly female-based, but actually many of the skills that men bring are really vital to some of the families. So I think it's a fantastic report, well done. I'm sure on behalf of the whole committee, we'd like to pass on our thanks, plus also to all of our staff, including the support staff, for everything they do. So please take them. So thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you.
For that. Much appreciated. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 7. It's pages 35 to 88 in your report, which is the Home to School Transport Review Briefing. We do have someone who's joined us here, a member of the public, Lindsay McLeod. She's here as an observer. I know Lindsay has been quite granular detail of helping to shape and frame things. So thank you very much for coming along today to listen to what we do. So this report, pages 35 to 88, Audrey, I think you're going to introduce it, and then Neil, I think you're going to take over from that point. So over to you, Audrey.
Thank you. And I'll just say, because I've failed to follow Chair's instructions earlier, and say I'm Audrey Kingham and Exec Director for Children, People and Education for our new members joining us today. So those of you will recall about 18 months ago, I think we talked to you about it does feel like a long time, so we've done a lot of work. We brought terms of reference to a home to school transport review to this committee to have a look at the different aspects, things that had been brought to our attention as a result of the pandemic. So there's an ongoing theme, sort of some legacy issues, whether or not the experience of children, young people and families who access the home to school transport were getting the best opportunity and routes that were available to them. And one of the other areas that we looked at was, is this also, I'm going to say, housed or located in the best possible service area within the council. So it has taken us 18 months. I know a number of colleagues and the committee have asked on several occasions for updates, but it's really important to get it right. And as you start to ask the questions, it actually gives us more questions to ask. And Neil, I'm sure we'll go through that detail with you. So what you have today is a summary of the report. You would see that there were an awful lot of appendices embedded within the report, so significant amount of work. I would like to acknowledge the amount of parents, carers and young people who engaged within this process, some of our service users, and also the home to school transport team, which rests within local services. So they have sat alongside Neil throughout the review. They've been part of the review. And I know, for example, Lindsay has been really valuable in terms of providing her own experience and helping with some of the potential solutions. I would just say before Neil comes in that I don't see this as a task and finish. This isn't the end of this, so we will continue to develop this over time. And ideally, once Neil's gone through the recommendations, I'll share with you some of the thoughts around the ways of working in the future. I'll hand over to Neil.
Thank you, and Neil Dorwood, Senior Manager of Education Development. Yes, so obviously the briefing is to bring the facts, the outcomes of the Home to School Transport Review, which was conducted during 2022. This particular review was an incredibly deep dive into every process and function of the home to school transport system. And that touched on to every single individual stakeholder officer in the council who has an influence or input into that. But equally as well, like what he said, externally as well, with external stakeholders, and particularly service users as well, which we consulted in a variety of ways. In one interview with Lindsay, for example, being one example, and also in a more broader sense with residents on an online survey with particular user groups. And that reached around, I think it was approaching 7,000 people who asked to participate in that. We did have several hundred responses to that as well, which was giving us some really firm data about the user experience, which was something which we haven't had before, which was really, really enlightening, particularly the way we split it into particularly discrete user groups to get really, really sharp feedback. Ultimately, 36 recommendations emerged from the review, and 30 of those we've been able to commence and put into action in some way, shape or form to this point in time. Three of the main ones are being driven forward by our best work streams as part of the changes we're implementing for the council. Those being the ones to implement independent travel training for young people with special educational needs, to pilot offering devolved transport budgets to our schools who want to partake, so that they can do their homeschool transport in a very different, flexible way to support their curriculum and their other areas that would be an advantage to control that in-house. And also exploring enhanced personal budgets for families with the most complex of travel arrangements. So again, they can introduce their own flexibility in their own way. So there are three of the significant recommendations that emerged. There were a minority of recommendations which were contingent upon getting the other structural changes within the council completed before we could implement those. I think now we're in a position where that is behind us, and those further recommendations can also be taken forward. I think now I would add that we have a particularly close and strong executive director level across both service areas that touch on the homeschool transport. So I think that puts us in good stead for the pushing those more significant changes in the way that we operate. So really, the full summary is in the briefing, and also the 50-page report was attached in the appendix, and there's a lot of information in there. But happy to take questions on all of that.
And I think it would be fair to say that this, and I think the clue is in the purpose of the report, it's emerging. This is work in progress and still developing. So before I open it up to questions, can I just ask, and I think Audrey kind of alluded to this, was part of the process to think about where homeschool transport actually sits within the council, who has ultimate responsibility for it?
Yeah, so at the moment, for example, SEN school transport is, I can say it's my accountability, so it sits within the SEN team, but home to school transport delivery rests within local services, so that the main bulk of mainstream home to school education rests within that. So the policies sit in education, but the practice sits in home to school, in local services. So as part of the review, one of the things we looked at is, should we change that? Would that make a difference? And so it happened to coincide, and this is as a result of some of the delay, so you haven't had this earlier. It coincided with some of the restructural activities going on within the senior management at Northumberland. And so what we chose to do was say we are minded to maintain the integrated transport team as an integrated transport team, to keep that team together, but actually be really clear that the way we will continue to work will likely be very different moving forward. So the two teams, home to school transport and school organisation, are getting together to look at how we could do that. So I would, for example, one of the ways that we've considered is, should the home to school transport be commissioned from children's services? Should that rest, the accountability rest with children's services and be commissioned from the transport team? Neil's outlined a way of doing things differently, and it's really clear from some of the feedback we've had, not just from individuals, but actually from that general information, that there are some ways that we could work very differently moving forward, and I think there are some real benefits. Ideally, we want the child at the heart of all of the decisions around transport, around anything education. So aligning school transport decisions with school applications would seem to make a really sensible start to this. So as parents, carers who would be making that application, from day one of putting that application into school, they'd understand where their single point of contact would be for any questions or queries that they might have. So the two teams, that's a piece of work that's just about to commence. Post this break, actually, some of the team are not in this week. So post this half-term break, those two teams will start to come together and develop that. And you're right, Chair, to say it is an urgent work. But we have been very clear, so myself and Simon Nielsen, who's the Exec Director for Place and Regeneration, we have been really clear that it's about the ways of working that will be different moving forward. And what we've got are a significant amount of recommendations and findings, actually, that's really rich, deep and valuable that will help us to determine the best ways to take it forward.
Brilliant. Thank you for that clarity. Questions? Morrison.
Thank you, Chair.
Caroline.
It's a very weighty report. It's very heavy going reading through this, as I found. And as you've said, the focus overall is the effect on the children. The question I wanted to ask is all of this work, all the decision making, and everything that does emerge, whatever takes place and whatever happens, if it's then found that there's potential negative impacts on the children, what would you do to maybe unravel some of that? Is there something that you've got in place to say, hang on, we've done all this, we've made all the decision making, we've took on board everything, but we've now got some feedback to say, this isn't working. Whatever we've put in place has potentially had a negative effect on our child user, and it's not working. We need to do something else and work sort of in an agile, and say, hang on, that's not working. We've done something that's had that wrong effect, and we need to pull back and do something different there. Have you got something in there, or got something in mind to think this is a potential event, eventuality, and so this needs to be in there just in case?
Yeah, so just in response, I think there are multiple ways in which we do that. Primarily around implementing anything new, we'd always do a short-term review and understand whether there are, I'm going to say sometimes we don't always get it right first time, or you think this is the right route and then actually you start down that journey and discover that you need to change something. So I think being agile is really, really important. Building in review points around any of the changes is significantly important. So some milestones and some checks. We definitely do that because we've got two different teams who are going to work very differently. And so the biggest challenge for me is ensuring that there are no gaps, that one team doesn't think the other team's doing something. And so Neil will be working alongside the teams to make sure that we follow through on this and do some checks and close the loops. I think going back to if we've done anything negative, I would hope that we wouldn't set out on that journey. As I said, the whole purpose around the review for this was about having the child at the centre and the family in decision. We check with the children, we check with the families routinely as well. I don't think we've done that enough historically. We got some really rich data into here, which really has driven some of the direction. And some of the new ways of working and the new suggestions. It is about improving and certainly not declining in any way the service or the experience that anybody would receive.
No, it's really great to hear, because as you say, what has been done wrong in the past, and I'm not saying in this department, in this area, but what has been done wrongly in the past is decisions have been made in some areas, not taken on board the end users, should I say. Things have been implemented and it's been a case of we're right and so it stays. And that's the wrong approach. So engaging with everybody and making sure that as best we can we're following that right path, but prepared to put things right if they're not right. If it's having that negative effect, it's definitely the right way to go. And accept that, if mistakes are made, we'll change it and not take that stick in the mud, approach to say, no, we're going to stick it with this way sort of thing, and we know what's better. But it's good to hear that you've taken that approach.
I think ideally we'd want to co-produce this. We have to manage the whole process. We've taken all of that information, had some really valuable insights from users. Got one in the room with us today, and that's been really helpful and valuable. And Lindsay's gone through the detail about the work that's been done, and I think, and I'm not going to look at her because I did read an email, but she did say that she felt she'd been listened to, and so that's the important bit. So understanding and listening, co-producing. And actually, if it's not quite right, make a change to get it better. You know, why wouldn't we want it absolutely spot on for all of our children who access these services?
Thank you.
Neil, did you want to come
I
on?
was, yeah, just add a little bit more the practical example of that as well. That, for example, if we take the devolved school budget recommendation, we have gone out for expressions of interest to schools who would be interested. And we think we're going to start with 2 schools, not with the whole cohorts of pupils, but ultimately doing that in a very, very controlled way, so we can learn lessons and steer it in an agile fashion. And actually, you know, go through those learnings with the schools who are really on board to drive their own transport in the you know, their own flexible ways. And ultimately, I think that will give us a lot of lessons we can learn and then mentor other schools with our, you know, schools who are already on board in our transport team to actually be able to implement it on their sites as well. So a very cautious approach, we can learn and do it with the least risk possible when we make it agile. And I think the consultation thing, again, is a very important thing. Mentioned that we consulted with users during the actual review itself. Well, we now have that framework to reuse year on year, and we are writing that into the policies for the transport delivery as well. So that will be an annual thing, so we can keep our finger on the pulse of exactly what the end user effects are on things that we change.
Great, that's very reassuring. Caroline, and then
Right, then first off, thank you for bringing this report, because obviously we did discuss this a while back. Great to see that a lot of the recommendations are going forward and are moving in the right direction, but I do have concerns that a couple of them are not in place yet that we discussed 18 months ago. So with regards to the safeguard and spot checks and the school transport, the vehicle spot checks as well. So for me, I'm just wondering what's the hold up on them, because I think they're things that if the vehicles aren't safe, the kids shouldn't be in them, full stop. And if we haven't got the safeguarding right on the transport, again, the kids shouldn't be in that transport, full stop. And we're 18 months down the road, so what's the hold up on that? I do think that it's still the onus is on the people, the transport companies that have the contract. And I just think we need some kind of that standardisation right the way across the board. And maybe some joined up thinking within here, because do we, like, when it comes down to the vehicle spot checks, well, from the county council, we do MOTs and we have a service area. Are we actually working and having communications where we turn around and like an Ofsted kind of thing, right, then next Tuesday I need your vehicle to do a drive through it and do a 50-point check. They can do it in quick fit to see what's wrong. Why can't we implement just them quick things like that? And with regards to the mapping software, have I had any conversations with logistics companies that do like lorries up and down the world really? So looking outside the current sector as well to get some of that expertise, and I just think we need to sort of bring that responsibility back in-house for the spot checks on the safeguarding for the vehicles, to make sure that everything is not just a case of this is the contract, you've won the contract, congratulations, we'll see you in 3 years. Actually, what are we doing to make sure that they are meeting our expectations from day one, 6 months in, 3 years down the line? And what is that process if somebody isn't? Number one, how would we ever know that they're not meeting the required standard? And if we're finding out, at what point do we turn around and take that contract off them? And like, what's the process to that? Because I still feel like we need to look at that side of things. Thank you.
So I'll take that if that's okay. So on the kind of compliance side, that is a function which exists. There are compliance officers who audit the transport operators. And that is a process which has been in place for some time. That is managed by local services within the passenger transport team. I think the safeguarding spot checks equally as well fall within those compliance officers within the transport team. I think one of the things that came out in the review was that the capacity of that isn't sufficient, and that because we have safeguarding professionals in children's services, which equally probably have a slightly different perspective, more from the child's viewpoint, that they could really enhance that. Obviously, that is a resourcing thing between how much of the job local services, how much of the job children's services do. I think now that we've got the restructure out behind us, and actually we can have a bit more of a joined up conversation on that between the executive directors and the teams, I think that was a very good time to push that forward. It's not a gap, but I think you can enhance it by taking that joint working approach across children's and local services on that compliance side.
I think it's important to say as well, so Neil said there were a few that were not yet started as a result of the structure. So I think I referred to ways of working. So it's really important that when they establish how that's going to work, for example, if it's school organisational team, they will set out exactly what their expectations are, as they do with many other contracting. Sue's team you've heard was all about SEND commissioning, and there is a whole framework around that within any provider must operate. They have to meet that minimum requirements. That would be very similar in terms, I don't yet know what it is because the teams will determine that, but that will be very similar in terms of there will be a framework, there will be expectations that have to be met and consequences if those contracts are not met.
It's just for me, it's that due diligence and making sure, because the thing is, if you just do a desk-based exercise or a desk-based audit, but actually walking into somewhere and seeing the reality of it, it's two different things. It's like, if you let me know that you're coming on a Sunday afternoon, my house will be spotless. If you randomly turn up on a Tuesday afternoon with no warning, it might not be. So you might have your ducks in a row when you know for a fact, but I think them spot checks in that.
So for me, I think it's unannounced spot checks.
Yeah, that's
So
what
that's
it needs to be, that unannounced.
Yeah.
And
So
that
that does exist. The spot checks do exist. But what I was really keen to do and what happened throughout this review was we did unannounced spot checks. So what you see in here is the unannounced detail that's in there. Now, I'm not going to put words into the team's mouth because they need to determine what that looks like, but I'm pretty sure that there would be unannounced spot checks within the commissioning framework.
So time-wise, going forward, when will we get the next follow-up and the impact of these?
Can I come back to you around a time frame? So I think we can easily do an update for you, probably later this year. We'll start to see some changes and some implementation. But we can do an update, even if that's just a verbal update.
So I think to pick on, I think where we're going with this report is very much around operational practice. So it's physically what staff are doing and how things are done. And it is, I think, the key word which I've been pushing that it's emerging. So that I think there are still things you're picking up. So I think it'd be useful to get an update at some point over the next couple of months about where we are with the implementation of this, because it has been a long time coming, but when you look at the detail which needs to have been done in order to reach this, you see how big an issue it is. So I think, and again, touching on something you alluded to there, Caroline, this should inform our procurement process going forward. So that kind of very seamless link between what we're asking external partners to deliver and how much we're going to pay for it, and coming with that transactional relationship or an expectation on quality, timing, staff, DBS, all those things which are in here. So I think this would inform that procurement process, and I think again that's something which you could bring back at the next update on how this is going to shape and bring things.
I think what we could bring back for you is, so what do those two teams determine? What is it going to look like moving forward? And then the commissioning framework. I think that's what.
And I think as well, this is great, but I think it needs to be a live document, and we need to see the impact of these changes as well. And actually, this is a starting point. So maybe in 6 months' time, some of this hasn't worked as expected, and maybe the training of your transport providers is something that you do as a standardisation in-house. So yes, you've got the contract in from Berwick right the way to the Wales and the West, but everybody has that in-house training before they even let loose. So saying this is great for now, but in 6 months' time, some of this might not be relevant, might need tweaked, or actually this is our foundation to build it even better in the future.
So I think we can pick that up as an action from today, so that'd be really helpful. Mary, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. Just really want to say kudos for this. You've written something which is describing an immensely complex system and process in a way which I can understand it, but it just shows how difficult it must be to put together and to manage such a system and to monitor it and to make sure it progresses and it changes and it meets the needs of families and of children. So I think two questions. The first one is just, what role did children have in putting in, because you spoke about speaking to parents, and but I just wondered what the children's process for being involved in this was. And also I think it's probably a question for you, Neil, because I suspect you might know what goes on in other local authority areas as well and have an idea of what happens nationally. I'm just wondering whether there's any areas where parents' cooperatives have set up to kind of, you know, deal with a particular transport issue. Perhaps if you're right out in the west and there's a group of children need to be transported and you're not keen on using taxis and escorts, are there any areas where parents' cooperatives have come together and local authorities commission services from them? Because, you know, again, I think that's something that perhaps could be thought about going forwards, because you take the commercial element out of it, you've got a proper, you know, healthy business model, but you've got parents who absolutely their most precious cargo is going to be transported, and so everything, their vested interest is in making sure that that's an excellent transport system. So I'm just curious as to whether you've got any awareness of that.
Might want to answer both.
I think so, yeah.
Both the voice and the enhanced personal budget approaches is something we've considered.
Absolutely, and I think where the children's voice came in was via the service user consultations, which were shared with parents, and that did also take, obviously via the parent, but ultimately taking the kind of the feelings of the child into account during those online consultations. The data in that is easily shared, actually, if you're interested in seeing that lower level granular sort of feedback that came out of it. Some summaries, and there were 5 discrete user groups taking feedback from, and that is presented in quite an accessible format as well.
I'd be really curious to see whether the children's views could be extracted from that. It's just because, you know, those of us who are parents know what we think and want isn't always what our kids think and want, and sometimes the louder voice, the quieter voice gets drowned out by the louder voice. It'd be great to see if they absolutely coincide, or if there's other things that we can learn from the children. So
I think one of the things I was conscious of on that was the fact that the users are all the way from very young to all the way up to 25 years old with special educational needs. So actually pitching it to the right end of that age spectrum was going to be quite different, actually. So it was a kind of one size fits all for that, which might be a slight disadvantage in the context of this question.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
I'll move on to the next question about the parental cooperatives in terms of offering transport. And I did speak to a range of other local authorities, predominantly ones with rural challenges, Lancashire, Surrey, for example. And that never came out in any consultation with other authorities, but I think it's an idea that is now worthy of exploration and established if indeed there are any pockets where, particularly given the rurality that we face, something of that nature could be of value. So I think that's a good point made. But so ultimately, in short, that never came out in any of the consultations, but it's an interesting point.
Thank you.
Can I just go back to Councillor Ball's point as well? Tracking and the digital sort of elements of transport management, because I didn't get a chance to answer that before. And you mentioned looking at logistics firms, etc. Actually, in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, there has been some significant advancement in the offer of digital transport management packages, and there's some really powerful packages available for not a particularly large expenditure, which give us the likes of, you know, a kind of single central record of all of the details of the transport system, whereby tracking of individuals with mobile devices, have they got the bus on time, are they on the bus, things of that nature are all readily built into the packages, and they are a lot more accessible and affordable than ever, and a lot more powerful than ever. So that is where some of the digital integration recommendations stem from. So I think there is a lot to learn from other sectors who are involved in transport, but actually I think the packages are already available, particularly tailored to local authorities who commission and deliver upstream transport. So I think there's potentially a range of off-the-shelf packages that we can consider going forward.
And again, just picking on Mary's point there about those community cooperative transport groups, some of them already exist. Certainly the NHS link into them with transportation transport. So it may well be something to look at. And again, if it's an offer and you have a collective of council want to come together to do that, then this could form part of the new way of working that we have. So good. Any other questions or comments? No, that looks very good. So again, thank you for that. What we'll do is we'll timetable in an update before the end of the year, which will just give us some of the, to tackle some of the questions which have been raised this morning. But again, this was just to give us an update. It's already been through to SNT, I believe.
Yes.
So it's already within the operational bubble of the council. So we just need now to make some of those further changes and then obviously make it happen and take on board what Councillor Swinburne said there about how we monitor and make sure that it's fit for purpose, and that's again an ongoing piece of work which we'll pick up in the report. So thank you very much for that. I know a very detailed piece of work, and Neil, I'm surprised you've still got hair. Right, we now move on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is the work programme. Chris, you're going to take us 89 to 96.
This is obviously the new work programme for the coming year. I'll be meeting with the chair and relevant directors to go through it and planning some of the more policy development work that this committee can start looking at.
Yeah.
But as always, if there's anything that members want just to consider for the work programme, just let either me or the chair know, and we'll then feed that into the spreadsheets.
Absolutely, and I believe we're starting the Tuscan finish.
Yes.
We're going to have a chat, I think, with some members about that. So it is happening. Apologies for the delay. It is being taken by the vice chair on Tuscan finish, but that is going to happen. So Chris will have a word with a couple of members after this meeting today, and we'll set something in. So moving on, items of urgent business. I have none. I don't see anybody putting their hand up telling me anything. So on that basis, oh, sorry, the next meeting is the 18th of July. I always forget about the next meeting, because I always have them in the diary. 18th of July is the next meeting. But thank you very much, and for the new members this morning, thank you very much for your contribution. Hope you found it interesting, and we'll see you all in July.
Lovely.